Hello everyone, this is Chidanand from Kratz Infotech NG and I welcome you to this short tutorial on Jenkins. What I plan to do in this tutorial is demonstrate the capability of a very powerful and useful plugin for Jenkins called SSH Pipelines Steps plugin. And what is that I plan to achieve with my demo is something similar to what I've depicted right here. So I have a Windows box. On this Windows box I have Jenkins 2.x installed. I also have Java JDK 1.8 and Maven 3.x that is installed. I have a source code for the purpose of depiction. I've just pulled out a simple Spring Boot kind of an application, but this is pretty much the same steps that you would follow if you want to build any Java based application and want to deploy it into some other box. So what I have is a simple Spring Boot application, the source code of which is put up on my GitHub account, on my GitHub publicly available GitHub server. So what I plan to do is using Jenkins, first I'm going to pull out this whole source code and build this application on Jenkins. Now once that is done, I typically have an artifact, and I think in this case it would be a jar file because all the Spring Boot applications are bundled as jar files by default, unless you want it to be a WAR file or something for a web application. So I would have whatever is the typical artifact that I've defined in my Maven based Spring Boot application that would be built here. Now once this is successfully built, I would want to pass on this artifact onto a separate Linux box that is running, and assuming that these are my application endpoints, I do not have any web server or anything that is running there for deployment. I have a simple jar file which is manually run on this box using just this java-jar or java-war kind of a stuff. Now how would I want to publish this war file or the jar file that is built on a Jenkins box, which is a separate box compared to this Ubuntu box? So if you look at how do you want to kind of achieve this task or the goal, there are multiple ways that one could think of. The best in my opinion would be to install a configuration management tool like Ansible on this Jenkins instance. Now if you have Ansible on this, you can do all those wonderful things that Ansible allows you or gives you as a part of its modules. And the whole idea is that you have a credential using which you can log into this particular box, and using Ansible you can run remote shell scripts or remote modules, so-called modules, which can pull content out here and do whatever you want based upon whatever is the permission or the sudo write access that is provided to you on this particular box. Now in my use case, I don't want to do too many things on this box. All that I got to do was just push this WAR file that is built here and copy it out here using SCP or SFTP or any of those modules, and possibly run a simple script file. Now this is all a part of my deployment, so I don't want to install Ansible, which is an overkill for my use case. So what I want to do is I would use a plugin called SSH Pipeline Steps plugin. I'm going to show you two different ways of doing that. One using just the UI. The other one is this SSH Pipeline Steps plugin that will allow me to write a complete pipeline steps, which will use a user credential in the first place, maybe a username and password of this remote box, and also an SSH key that I'm going to generate. So Jenkins will use both these methods, thereby gaining access into this particular box, and then copy a jar file, run a few commands, and somehow ensure that the application is eventually deployed on this box. Though the use case is pretty simple, this gives you a big perspective about how exactly you can use Jenkins to go ahead and deploy artifacts, possibly run some commands on remote boxes without really using Ansible or any of those configuration management tools, which are not really a suitable use case for the scenario that I've depicted. All right, so now that is clear, let me just go ahead trying to set this whole thing up. One small word of advice. What I've done is I don't have another Linux box, or rather I don't want to use that Linux box. So what I want to do is I will virtually bring up this box using one of those virtualization tools. So this box where Spring is running is nothing but another VirtualBox which I brought up on my same machine, which is my desktop. But for all practical purposes, even if you run this on a separate Linux box, the usage of this will all be the same. Hope that's clear. All right, now let me get started with my lab. Let me bring up my Jenkins instance by starting the Windows services, and let me log into my box. Okay, now what I'll do is let me first try to install a very simple plugin and check if the connectivity between my Linux box and my Jenkins server goes on pretty fine. So let me go to manage Jenkins and manage plugins. I'm on Jenkins 2. Some version, about 2. So let me go to available and search for a plugin called SSH. Alright, now I see this plugin called SSH. This plugin executes shell commands remotely using SSH protocols. Now this is like a trial thing for me, because before I run my SSH pipeline steps plugin, let me first figure out if the connection works very well, or if there are any issues while connecting to the Linux box by using this plugin. So let me choose this plugin, and mind you may see some other versions depending upon the Jenkins versions that you have, compatibility levels between your Jenkins and the SSH plugin. So I see this in case you don't see this version or some other version, but if that shows up for you and it clearly, you can look at the documentation around the plugin by right clicking here and say open in a new link. This is the plugin that I'm going to use. The versions, as I said, doesn't really matter because the versions are dependent upon the Jenkins instance. So this is the plugin. It's a pretty popular plugin, been there for quite some time around. There's so many downloads of this and usage of that. So that's the plugin that I'm going to check, and I'm saying install without restart. Now this is from my Jenkins end. I'm trying to get my plugin so that I can talk to a Linux box. Now I would need a Linux box for me to connect to. So as I said in the beginning of my tutorial, I do not want to use any other Linux box, so I will try to virtually bring up another server on the same box. So I use something called as a Vagrant. It's a very wonderful tool by a company called HashiCorp, and using this I will use any of the virtualization software to bring up or spin up Linux instance. So typically when you use Vagrant, all that you got to do is put in all the content as to what exactly you want on your server in a simple file called Vagrant file. And this is my sample Vagrant file, and the important thing for you to note is that this is the image that I'm trying to download, and this is the IP address using which my VirtualBox will come up. So I put all this in a simple file called Vagrant file, and I go put it in any folder that I want, and I'm just going to say Vagrant up. Now this will ensure that in no time a Vagrant box with all these configurations would come up. I've already done that, and if I see the status, it should show me a running VM with a name on it. Yes, if you see this, it's running. There's one virtual machine, and the name of that is Ubuntu, and this would be the IP address of that particular machine. Now let me check if I can ping to this particular IP address. Alright, I'm able to ping to it. Now mind you, this is the same thing that as good as you having another Linux box which you will try to connect irrespective of where it is located, as long as it's reachable to your Jenkins box. It's pretty much the same steps. So Vagrant status, it's up and running. Now let me get into that box. Okay, now Vagrant SSH, I will get into Ubuntu. Now I'm physically logging to that Linux box. Now who am I? I'll be a Vagrant user, and what is my machine details? Ubuntu, I'm running Ubuntu. I think 16.0.4 or something is what I'm running. What is my IP address? This is my IP address. Alright, so now my Linux box is up and running, and assuming that this is any other Linux server that is available for you for connection, I would need to set up a username or a credential out here. and this would be the credential that Jenkins will in turn use to get into your box for some deployments. As a standard practice, you would typically create a user for Jenkins, and with whatever permission that you would need for Jenkins, put that in a sudo list. So I'm not going to get into all that stuff. I would just go ahead and create a user, and the username would be Jenkins. Okay, now first time is like I'm going to create a user. I'll just pass on some sort of a credentials in terms of password. I will use the SSH plugin that I put on my Jenkins and try to first connect to this box and see if I can do any simple SSH commands. So your sudo add user Jenkins password. I will set a simple password, probably welcome 123, welcome 123. What is the name of my user? Jenkins is good. I don't want any room number, I don't want any phone number. That is correct. Okay, now this guy went ahead and created a user called Jenkins. So let me just check if this user exists first. Sudo su Jenkins. Now I can become Jenkins, and it also creates a home directory called /home/Jenkins. So I'm good. I can get into this box. I can using the username and credential, I can sudo into this box. Now let me see how can I connect to this box from my Jenkins instance. Okay, now my plugin is installed. So as and when a plugin gets installed on Jenkins, some sort of a new UI would show up or an option would show up somewhere. You are supposed to find it and go ahead and put all the configuration that you want in that particular place. So let me figure out where to do that. Possibly let me go to configure system. Right, hopefully it should be here. Yeah, this remote SSH sites is where you're allowed to specify all the details. I think I had put this earlier, that's why it still remained. So this is where I can add multiple servers in case I want. I can add one more server. I know I don't want that now, but you know, you can add multiple stuff here. So this is the IP address of my machine, 192.168.50.50. Okay, port 22 is the default port. Credentials, I don't want to put in any credential now because I'll have to put in a new credential because I created a user and the username was Jenkins. So let me go ahead and hang on. Why is that? I already see. Okay, I think these are for my saved sessions. So let me go ahead and delete these Jenkins credentials, otherwise it becomes a little confusing. So these are sonar credentials. Okay, probably this is the credential that I created for my sonar cube. So let me just go and delete it. Okay, this as well. Okay, this one as well. Alright, now let me go back to manage Jenkins and configure system. Alright, so this is my IP address. Port 22 is the default port. Credential, let me add a new credential. Okay, now this is the credential, or this is where I specify the credential of my Linux box. So the username was Jenkins and the password was welcome123. I can give an ID that I want, you know, that's not required, not mandatory stuff. Okay, so that's all I need to specify here. You know, the username was Jenkins and the password is welcome123. So whatever is the password of that remote machine where I created this particular user. So after I add it, it should show up here. Now this is the user credential that I would want Jenkins to use while logging into this box. I can also check the connectivity once. Right, now this guy, it says connection successful. Alright, so far so good. With the username and credential that I supplied, Jenkins is able to go to that box. Now let me just put up a simple job just to check if my credential that I specified works properly with my job. So freestyle project, I'm just going to put in simple job. just to verify if I can use the credentials or SSH plugin and try to do something with my job. Alright, so I don't want to do anything here. Possibly as a part of the build step, I would say execute shell script on remote host using SSH. Now this option would come only after you install the SSH plugin. Okay, now perfect. It shows me this is my Jenkins user credential, just the username. The password is anyway encrypted, and this is the IP address of my machine, and 22 is the port. Now what are the commands that you want to run on that box? So I will say pwd, possibly I will say ls. I will just touch a file called hello dot or success.txt. Okay, and then I will do an ls. Okay, this is all that I would want to run, execute each line. I would want Jenkins to in a script individually. Yes, that's what I would want to do. This is good enough. So let me save. I don't want to put anything else on my job. So Jenkins site is not specified. This is my Jenkins site. Okay, I think there's just there are multiple ones. You'll see them here, so this should be good. So let me just save this and try to build now. Alright, so if you see here now, using the SSH plugins that I installed, it's able to get into the machines and trying to run some of those commands that I specified. So if you see here, when I say pwd, it shows me that I'm on this home Jenkins because Jenkins logged into the box using my Jenkins credential. So whenever any user logs into the Jenkins box using Jenkins user, he'll be by default taken into home Jenkins. So pwd, this one, ls, possibly it did this touch success.txt, and then ls was showing that. So if at all, let me check in case this is the file that is actually created on the box. So I will say ls Jenkins success.txt file is already created. Okay, now this was the file that Jenkins managed to create. So to recap what I did till now, I had my Jenkins instance up and running on my Windows box. I also provisioned a Linux box. I used Vagrant, but doesn't matter. Even if you have some other server that is running elsewhere, it's running some Ubuntu or any other Linux, using an SSH plugin that was installed on Jenkins, and by providing the username and the password credentials of a user who has been created here on this Linux box, Jenkins was able to SSH into this box and run some simple commands. And that is the first step, where I have to establish all connectivity and check if everything is good from the perspective of Jenkins being able to log into this box. That's one step. Now what I want to do is I want to take this a step forward, and instead of username and credentials, I would typically want to configure SSH keys. That's the most preferred way of communication. In this case, I will create a pair of keys. There are multiple ways of creating keys using any tool that you would want. And what is interesting is that I want to put up my public key on this box here, and then using the private key of the key pair, I will now install this SSH pipeline steps plugin, and I'll write some pipeline steps, which is nothing but a groovy syntax, and check first if I can get into this box using the same credentials for which the keys are created. If I can do that, then possibly I'll try to push some scripts and see if that works. Now, if everything goes well, then pulling the GitHub source code and then building it and then completing the complete exercise would be very easy. There are multiple ways of creating a key pair. You could use a key generator, you could use a puttygen, you could use any other tool. What I prefer to do is I have a git bash that I've installed, so I typically try to use this in order to create a key pair. Alright, so let me find a directory. Okay, this is where I have a folder, so I'm going to create a key pair here using the ssh-keygen command. Sometimes what I've noticed is that there are issues when you create a key pair, because there are so many formats of these key pairs, and Jenkins has problems if you create a key pair which are not in the classic OpenSSH format. So in case you have to debug all that issues when you key pair don't work properly, you can look into this. But for now, just try this out with this option. SSH-keygen is the tool that I will be using. -m and PEM is the format. So this will create a pair of SSH keys in the classic OpenSSH format. Alright, so generating a private public key pair, where you want to key this, what is that file where you want to store the key pair. So I will just give it as Jenkins-keys. This will be my name. I don't want any passphrase. Alright, a pair of keys got created, and if you see in this place there will be two keys created. One is the public key, and this is the public key, and this is the private key. Now you can create the keys anywhere, but now that you want Jenkins server to, in order to use this key pair, somehow you have to ensure that the public key of this guy is copied onto the Linux box. Now there are multiple ways of again doing this. You can go to the Linux box and then create .ssh folder in the home directory, and then add authorized keys and all that, but I'll use another command to kind of do the same thing for me. Alright, so let me just check this. This is my Linux box. So under home Jenkins, I don't have any folder here right now. Okay, I just don't have anything else other than this profiles and cache and stuff like that. Okay, now let me try to copy this key using a command called SSH copy ID. Okay, yeah, this command seems good. Okay, SSH copy ID is a command where I can kind of pass on the key that I created here to any server of my choice. So SSH-copy-ID-I, and I'm going to give the keys that is there. So my key pair name is called Jenkins-keys, and where do I want to copy these keys onto? So this is my IP address of my Linux box, and Jenkins is the user credential that I will use in order to copy my keys. Alright, now possibly will ask me for my username, my credentials. So I remember my credential. Okay, so I provide that credential. So with my credential from my Windows box, it copied the keys onto my Linux system. Now let me go back to my Linux system and check. So if you see here, now I have this .ssh folder that is created earlier. This wasn't here. If I go to this .ssh folder, there would be a folder called, there'll be a file called authorized keys. Now, alright, so these keys are automatically copied on from my particular Windows box from where I created the keys. Now let me check if and everything is okay with these keys. So the way to check that is I will do SSH -i. Yep. So I'm just trying to check if I can log into this box using the keys that I recently created and pushed onto the other server. So SSH-i Jenkins keys is the key that is generated, and what is the username? Jenkins at the IP address. So with that, I was able to log into the box. So now it is very clear that the keys that I created, the keys that are here, the Jenkins keys, I was able to use these keys and log into the other box. Alright, so the keys are here. There are two keys. One is the private key and one is the public key. Now what I want to do is somehow ensure that my Jenkins understands these keys and can use these keys to log into the Linux box. Alright, so what I'll do is I will now install another plugin, and this would be the SSH steps plugin. So manage Jenkins. I will check if it's already installed. I don't believe it is installed. Okay, no, it's not installed, so I'll go to available and check for SSH. Okay, so this SSH pipeline steps plugin. So I'm going to install this plugin. Alright, so now what I need to do additionally is that somehow ensure that the key pair, wherever I generated that, and as of now my key pairs are lying somewhere here. Now these key pairs will have to be got into Jenkins instance. Right, so what I want to do is go back to Jenkins, go back to manage Jenkins, and there's a credentials out here. So I'm going to add a new set of credentials here. Okay, and this credential will be for the SSH keys that I've created. So SSH username with a private key. Okay, I'll have to specify a key ID. Now when I put in all the steps for my pipeline, the key ID becomes very important. Otherwise I don't really have to give an ID, because when I use my Jenkins UI, I always see those keys popping up there. But when I run my pipeline scripts, key ID becomes a unique identifier for any of my credentials within my Jenkins instance. So I will give a name for this. I'll say Jenkins-ID. Description not required. Renews. Okay, I will say ID2. Jenkins-ID-2. Username. This is the username of the user that I created as a part of the key pair. So Jenkins is the user using which I'll be logging to the box. I will have to enter the key directly here. So I will have to go and choose the private key, because the public key is already pushed onto the Linux box. So the private key will have to be entered here. So I'm going to pause the video for a minute. I'm going to copy the key and then paste it here and then say OK. So I just opened up the keys in a notepad, copied all the content, and I've pasted it here. I don't have any passphrase. In case you create a passphrase for your keys, this is where you enter your passphrase. So importantly, this is the one, and this SSH username with a private key, and this ID is what we'll use when I try to put in my Jenkins pipeline scripts. Okay, this is the ID, and I'm going to say OK. Now the Jenkins user ID is created now, and if you see here, there are SSH username with a private key. There are two things. If you say update, you will see this back here. In case you change the keys or something, you can come back and replace the keys here. Alright, so this becomes very important for me. So let me copy this. Alright, now what I want to do is I want to put some simple job just to check if at all my key pairs and my SSH pipeline steps that I put in, that works correctly. So let me put a new pipeline job this time. I will say YouTube SSH pipeline check. Okay, I'll just make this as a pipeline job, and because I'm going to write my Groovy DSL scripts. Now this is the home page of the Jenkins pipeline plugin that I've used, SSH steps plugin. I can put this up in the somewhere in the documentation of this video. This has got very detailed steps as to what should you configure, how to configure, what are all the different commands that the plugin kind of supports. Now I picked up a small excerpt from this particular homepage, and let me just show that to you. Okay. All right. Now this is a small excerpt for just checking if at all everything works with the plugin and usage of that plugin in terms of the pipeline scripts. Right, remote name could be anything for that matter. Remote host is what is important. This is the IP address of that particular machine with credentials, SSH private key, credentials ID, and this is where I need to specify the ID name that I created. Right, and then key file variable, just identity is it's a standard one. Passphrase, there's no passphrase here. I don't want anything else. Username variable not required. And what is the remote user? This is the user on the remote machine. So Jenkins is the user. All right, and if you look at the syntax of this, this is pretty simple. There's a stage that I've defined here. This is just what I want to see in my stage as a name of my stage. And this is very important. You'll see there are so many things supported out here. So we can look at this one by one. Write file is nothing but it's going to write a file, and it's going to create a file called xyz.sh, and it is going to put some content into this file, and the content is nothing but pwd. So it's going to create locally a file called xyz.sh, and it is going to just put pwd, or let me put date. Okay, and after that, SSH script remote. Now this will run a script remotely, and what is the script that will run? It will run this local script that it is created. SSH put. SSH script is for running script. SSH put is for actually copying the file, any file. So I'm going to copy it from remote, copy to the remote, and from where xyz is the local file that I created, and where am I going to copy this into the home/Jenkins folder of the remote box. And I'll try to run this again. So I'll use a command called SSH command remote. What is the command that I want to run? First of all, when I copy any file, the permissions on those of that file on that machine could be, cannot really guarantee that. So I'm going to do a change mode 777 of one file xyz.sh, and then I can run this as ./xyz.sh. Now this is just for checking, some small things, but eventually what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to see if this key pair is correctly coupled with my Jenkins instance. Alright, so this is what I'm going to copy. This is my pipeline script. So I'm going to copy this and put this as a part of my pipeline here. Alright, now let me save this and try to run this job. Oh, great, that went on just fine. So it was able to copy the xyz.sh, that was the script that I wrote, and it was able to send this file also, because I put SSH copy also. It was able to send this file into the home directory. If you see, some of them are masked out because these logs should not be visible for for everyone for consumption. So some things which are not meant for everyone is kind of masked out. So what I put in was, my command was date, so I think it's probably putting out the date. So let me just log into my box and see if the file that I pushed in has come in here. You see this? A file that was copied here. If I see xyz.date. Alright, so one major part of my pipeline is all properly verified. So I'm able to log into the box. I'm able to push some commands onto the box. I can write files into the box because my permissions and everything is very nicely set in. Now I've put in a proper job so that I can pull the source code from my GitHub repository, build a jar or a war file, and on this machine I think I have Java up and running. Yes, I already have Java 8 that is up and running. So I will just put up a final job which will push the war file onto this file, to this any specific folder out here on my Jenkins, and then if at all there's already an instance of this jar file running as a part of any JVM, I'm going to bring it down and launch a new JVM with the updated jar file that I built and pushed through Jenkins. Now that I've perfectly set up all my Jenkins plugins and also figured out the SSH connectivity between my Jenkins and my deployment Linux box, let me spend a little bit of a time in going through quickly this sample source code that I have kind of referenced. So I've got some Simple SpringBoot application which I have forked from repository. This is a very popular repository that I forked from. It's a simple Spring Boot kind of an application. Any of your Spring Boot application would also work in a similar fashion. So this is a Maven based Spring Boot application. There's some source files out here. It's a web app kind of a thing, so it shows up UI so that it is very easy for us to check if at all our deployment and everything has gone good. And the way to build this would be a simple Maven stuff where MVN package would build my whole application. Alright, now what I'm more interested in is that once I build this, how would I go ahead and deploy it onto my Linux box? And also, what if there is already a running application, a version of the application that is already running? Now, there are various ways of deploying a Spring Boot application. The most simplest one is what I picked up, where I assume that whatever nodes that is responsible for hosting the Spring services, you're going to manually deploy all this out there. So it's logical that we kill any other existing application that is already running and then launch the new one. So this is my repository. I'll also give the link to my repository in the video. Um, so what I have is I have a couple of script files as well, and this is all kind of helper kind of a scripts. The first one is this killboot.sh. So this is a simple shell script that I will use to find out all the Java applications or Java processes that is running on my box, and if at all there's anything running, then I'm going to gracefully kill it by issuing a kill-9. All right, so this is one of the scripts that I will be using, and this I will trigger or kick off from my Jenkins box. There's one other script also. This is for deployment. So it's a simple deployment, as I said. On my Linux box, I already have Java 8 that is up and running. So all that I got to do is somehow ensure that whatever is the WAR file that is being built from Jenkins is pushed onto this box in some location, and I will go to this location and I run a no hangup java-jar. I give out the WAR file that I reference the WAR file, and also I ensure that the system.out gets redirected to a log file. This is a simple Spring Boot a deployment script that you would find anywhere. But the interesting thing is that I'm going to use all these stuff from my Jenkins instance, and I'm also going to push these scripts into the other Linux box. And if there's any issues with regard to the scripts not running properly, DOS to Windows or DOS to Linux formatting change that is required, I'm going to use all the commands from a Linux box, from a Linux Jenkins instance, and I'm going to run this remotely on the Linux box. All right, now let me put up a simple job for pulling the source code of this repository, first building it, and then ensuring that I run all the scripts files which will copy the WAR file. If there's already an existing application or a Java process that is running, kill it, and then launch the new one. I have jotted this down here as well for your reference. So let me quickly go through this and then I will copy the script file. So I don't want to go into too much of details on this. There are a lot of YouTube tutorials where you can look at as to what are these individual steps. So this is my remote Jenkins remote host IP address and all that. This is first stage where I'm going to check out the source code, and I'm going to reference my GitHub URL and specify that the code be checked out from this. And the next step is to build it. I'm going to launch an MVN Maven. As I mentioned earlier, Maven is already set out and the path is all set for my Jenkins. So when I say MVN package, the application will straight away build. Now assuming everything goes well, I will have to go ahead and deploy it onto the Linux box. So in this third step, which is deploy Spring Boot app, I'm going to use the script that I showed in my last job. So with credentials, Jenkins ID 2, all these are the regular suspects that I picked up from my last step. Interesting thing is I'm going to run a bunch of these commands in some order. So let me quickly go through what are these steps. Again, these are just some simple steps that I have used. Possibly you'll find some better ways of doing this as well. The first and foremost is as and when the user Jenkins user logs into the box, as I said, he will be redirected or he will be placed into his home directory, which is nothing but home/Jenkins on this box. So yeah, so Jenkins user logs in, he will get into home/Jenkins folder. So now I want to create a folder here. So I'm using SSH command and creating a folder here. that's called mkdir deployment. I'm going to create a folder called deployment. Also, first time it's okay to create this. Next time around when I try to create this, maybe this step would fail for me. So fail on error false, because I'm going to run this job from Jenkins. I don't want any error with regard to this deployment directory being present to fail my job, because I'm going to create this deployment folder only the first time when I'm going to run this job. The next time around, this deployment folder is what I'll be using. So this first step will take care of creating a deployment folder if it doesn't exist. After that, I have these two shell script files that I've written locally, and these are available from my Jenkins, because the source code is going to be pulled into Jenkins. It will be available in the Jenkins working directory. So from there, I'm going to copy these two shell scripts into this deployment folder. Okay, so that is SSH put. This is the command that it will do that. After I copy that, sometimes there is usually formatting changes which doesn't allow the shell scripts to run when you copy or when you write the shell scripts in Windows and try to copy it onto the Linux box. So I will use, or I'll run a tool called DOS to Unix, and this tool will ensure that any file, if it is any formatting issue with it in terms of line carriage, line return or carriage returns and new line characters and all that stuff, it is going to ensure that all this will be sorted out. So the file that I'm copying is from my Windows box, and once it's put on the Linux box, I'm going to run this DOS to Unix. Now before I run this, I have to ensure that this is present on this system. So if it's not there, sudo apt-get install DOS to Unix, and that will ensure that this particular tool will get installed. Is it not there? DOS to Unix something. Okay, yeah, DOS to Unix is there. There's no file, that's all good. So this utility is present on my system. If it's not there, this would fail for you. So I'm going to run this DOS to Unix, and then if you see this in one command, I'm running a lot of things. I'm getting into this deployment folder. I'm running DOS to Unix on this killboot.sh. This will ensure that all the formatting changes would be taken care of. After that, I'm saying change mode 777. So this is to ensure that the executable permissions are provided for this killboot.sh. Many of these commands do not have a wildcard, or they don't accept a wildcard entry. So that is why I'm running them individually. So after I change the permission for this, it's time to run this, invoke it by this command //killboot.sh. Now this will ensure that if there's any Java process ID that is running on this machine, would be grabbed and it will be killed if at all it is present. Now my assumption is that I don't want any other Java application or any other Java process other than this Spring Boot application or Spring Boot Java process to be running. If that is not the case, you can kind of modify this according to your need. Okay, now after that, this would actually mean that I'm bringing down my deployment. After that, I would need to copy whatever is the war file that is being built on my Jenkins instance. So before that, I will go ahead and remove the older war file. Now again, if this is not required, if you have a different names, or if every build has got a different name for you, you can kind of omit this step. But I believe in manually or automatically removing these war files. So rm home Jenkins deployment /tar.war. Again, fail on error false if it's not there. Don't worry about it. That if it's there, just go ahead and remove this war file. And then I will put the latest version of this, and this is picked up from my target folder. Now the working directory of my Jenkins job would have this war file, and if you look at the pom.xml file, you would find all the versions and everything mentioned here. So I'm going to pick and copy from the target folder war file. I'm going to pass it on to the deployment folder. Now after that, it's I need to run this deploy.sh. So for that, before that, run this DOS to Unix deploy.sh, change mode, and then deploy, and eventually clean up all the scripts. Go ahead and remove these scripts one after the other. So this is a simple the script file that I can use in order to ensure that I put up a simple shell scripting job. I'm sorry, what am I saying? A simple pipeline job which will use the SSH pipeline steps plugin and run this thing for me. So let me copy this whole thing in the raw format and put up a new job. And before that, let me check if there's no deployment folder and all that. There's nothing here. This is home Jenkins. If I do ls, this was from xyz.ss, was the older file that we copied from my last job. So that's still there, but you would not see any deployment or any other folder. All right, so I'm going to copy this and let me put up a new job. Okay, I would say YouTube SSH YouTube SSH deploy job. Oops, job. All right, and this is a pipeline job. And whatever I've copied, I'm just going to paste it out here. All right, let's save and let me build it. This may take some time for it to build. It is going to pull up all the Maven dependencies. It's gone to the Git repository. It's pulled up my source code. It is trying to build this with this mvn package, so it'll take some time. Yeah, it built it pretty fast. And if you see this is the war file that got built. Okay, now it is trying to first make directory. It's supposed to make a folder called deployment. Then it's trying to run the kill boot. Before that, it should run the dos2 unix command. Okay, so this is just copying the file. All right, now it is running this dos2 unix, changing the mode, deployment. Everything looks good. Let me just go ahead and check on this machine. You see that there's a deployment folder. Let me get into deployment folder. Yeah, there's an app log that is running. Let me just tail it. All right, so the application got started up. It's running. If I do a ps-aef and grep java, I should see the Spring Boot application running. And let me just check what is there in the UI, because what is the IP address? 192. Yep, there you go. There's a simple Spring Boot application that came up, and click me to say hello. Oh, that's nice. So I had one version of this application running successfully. All right, now what I want to do is let me just check if everything goes well if I redeploy this file again. So before that, let me just make some changes to my script file, or rather let me make some changes to my application so that I can notice the change that happens. So let me go into source main. Let me go into this web app folder, index.html. All right, so this is what I typically see now. If you see this application, this is what I say: Spring Boot example, click me to say hello. So let me just, in a very bad way, straight away modify this on the server. Click here to say hello. So what I will do is, in this paragraph, let me put new deployment from Jenkins, something like this, so that I can identify a new deployment has happened. All right, so let me just go ahead and commit this change straight away. I made my change in my source code. Now let me go ahead and build this again. Okay, so it should pull in my new source code. I should have an update on the UI as soon as it happens. And more interestedly, I'm interested in looking at so this is the last commit message that was there. Yeah, what I was saying was, I'm more interested in ensuring that the deployments happen in a smooth way without really affecting anything. So gracefully, the older version of my application should get stopped. The new jar file or the war file should be pushed in there. After that, the job should run, and yeah, looks like that has happened. And let me just see what is, let me try to refresh this. Yep, this new deployment from Jenkins. This is from the latest code that I put in, and I hope you found this video informative, and as usual, I'll put in all the source code that I used in this demonstration up on my GitHub repository. If you have any trouble in any of the steps that I mentioned here, please feel free to leave a comment, and I'll try to address it as and when I can. The whole idea is that Jenkins has got so many plugins, and SSH pipeline plugin is such a very useful plugin using which you can connect to not just one, multiple hosts running on Linux, and then do all kinds of stuff out there, which will typically be a requirement when you want to deploy or run some refresh kind of an activities pertaining to your application. All right, guys, thanks a lot for watching, and you guys have a great day.